go back to your seats. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good short break. We are now moving on to the third and the last thematic session of ASEAN High-Level Symposium on Disaster Management. This session will talk about strengthening community resilience and multi-stakeholder partnerships. I would like to invite the moderator of this session, Mr. Drasko Kragulijak, Director of Strategy, Risks and Partnership, Red R Australia. I would like to also invite our awesome panelists for this session. Dr. Rahmawati Hussein, Advisory Board Member of the Indonesia National Disaster Management Agency. Mr. Jeremy Wellard, Regional Representative for the Asia and the Pacific International Council of Voluntary Agencies. Dr. Eiko Sakurai, Associate Professor, International Research Institute of Disaster Science, Tohoku University. Ms. Ewa Wojkowska, co-founder of Kpernik, and Ms. Tiziana Bonapace, Director of UNESCO. Mr. Drasko Kragulijak, you may start this session. Thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Our thanks to Your Excellencies, the organizer, ASEAN Secretariat, the International Strategy Study University. This is the last session of the day, and hopefully we will be finished within 1 hour, which I think all of you will appreciate at the end of the day. The session is continuing from the previous two when we were discussing about the policy and the early warning systems and the use of technologies in dealing with the effective emergency response mechanisms. This session is going to look into partnerships, into localization, into strengthening local resilience, connecting the local wisdom with the national response, with the national actors, but as much trying to see how the outside world can connect with the local knowledge. To the extent that I might just bring a little anecdote that I've heard today. We have on the panel Rahmawati from Muhammadiyah, and I was reading one of the informations that there is about 35 million members in Muhammadiyah. I come from Australia, there is 25 million of us over there. So sometimes I have a question on my mind, why do we actually need to go, why do we are asked to assist the organizations and countries which are much bigger than us? Do we actually ask the question, are we needed, when should we come in, and when we are supposed to leave? Hopefully some of these questions will be answered into the panel discussion today, and I'll probably do a bit of a different intro than the other moderators in order not to disrupt the flow of the session. So I will introduce the panelists in one go and then give them the opportunity to put their presentations to you. But as with the others, I just want to give you a brief overview of what the session is supposed to cover and what we are supposed to answer in the presentations from the participants and the panel members. So there are three questions like in the previous sessions. Number one is how to create an enabling environment for advancing the localization agenda on disaster management in ASEAN, sharing with us good practices, best practices, but as well challenges and opportunities to improve. The second one is what are the existing modalities that have been had by the ASEAN to foster a strong partnership on the culture of resilience between communities and private sectors. What kind of partnerships, if I may use the word urgently, or is necessary to have at this point in time to foster those relationships further and to make the communities disaster resilient. And then the last one was what I mentioned at the beginning, how we can use the local wisdoms and traditional knowledge in the positioning it vis-a-vis the international mechanisms and instruments that we have in the disaster risk management. And with that, I will introduce the panel members for today. And I will start with Ms. Eva Wojkowska, who is going to be the first panelist. Eva Wojkowska is the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of Kpernik, an award-winning organization that focuses on finding smart solutions to address social and environmental challenges. Before Kpernik, Eva was working with UN agencies, UNDP in particular, and World Bank in several Asian and African countries. She has been recognized as the Rutgers University Social Entrepreneur of the Year, an Asia Society 21 Young Leader, and an Ashoka Fellow. The next panelist after Eva is Mr. Jeremy Wellard, who is the regional representative for Asia and the Pacific of ICWA, which is the International Council of Voluntary Agencies. And a brief information on Jeremy. He is living in the region about a decade now. He was working with a number of organizations before he joined the ICWA. But currently he provides the policy advocacy and coordination support to NGOs and NGO networks working in the humanitarian settings across the region and heads ICWA's global work on the localization of humanitarian action. That also in connection with his previous job, which was with OCHA when he was working on the organization of the World Humanitarian Summit, including the global consultations and the regional consultations. Like I say, he is based in Asia for over 10 years, and his experience also is working with the social enterprises as much as the NGO and private sector. His background is social and behavioral sciences studies, and he has a master's in international development studies. After Jeremy, we will hear from Tiziana Bonaparte, who is the director of the Information and Communications Technology and Disaster Risk Reduction Division of UNESCAP, based in Bangkok. A quick information about Tiziana, that she's Director of Information Communication Technology and Disaster Risk Reduction Division of the UNESCAP. Prior to that, she was the head of Sub-Regional Office for North and Central Asia with the same organization. She is also international development economist who joined the UN in 1990s as a UNIDO associate expert, sessions for countries with special needs. From 2008 to 2010, Ms. Bonaparte led the preparation of ESCAP's flagship publication, the Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific on regional macroeconomic performance. Since 2011, Ms. Bonaparte has worked on regional connectivity issues and the opportunities that seamless infrastructure and market integration offer for economic diversification and competitiveness. Since 2016, Ms. Bonaparte has led ESCAP's ICT and disaster risk reduction program, which seeks to build resilience to disaster through improved connectivity and technological innovation. Throughout her career, Ms. Bonaparte has led the preparation of studies, research, and analytical papers, and has participated as a panelist and resource person in many meetings and senior government officials and business leaders. We also have then the panelists from the science sector, or academia, if you want to call it, practical research. Dr. Eiko Sakurai, who is Associate Professor of Toyo Eiwa University and Deputy Chief of International Collaborating Center of Disaster Education Implementation and Research of the International Research Institute of Disaster Science, IRIDES, of Tohoku University. She has a PhD in Educational Development from Kobe University and Master of Public Administration, School of International Public Administration, Columbia University, New York. She published a number of work throughout her career. Without going through it all, just want to add a couple of sentences on the biography. She started her career in disaster recovery and disaster risk reduction by joining Save the Children Japan in 2011 after the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami disaster. Since then, she has been devoted herself to develop a sustainable model of school safety in Japan and Asian countries, including Indonesia, Philippines, Nepal, Vietnam, and Myanmar through her researches. She has been supporting schools and boards of education as a member of School Disaster Safety Promotion Committee in Ishinomaki City, Miyagi Prefecture, to develop a locally based disaster education program in Ishinomaki City since 2011, and developed a teacher's guidebook on implementing reconstruction and disaster risk reduction mapping program. She is board member of SEEDS Asia, NGO focusing on DRR education in Asia, and a co-editor of a book, Disaster Resilience of Education System Experiences from Japan. And I will leave my most distinguished panel member last, and I will introduce her before her session, but I'm sure you probably all know her. And with that in mind, I would ask Eva if she can take the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for the great pronunciation of my name. Doesn't happen very often. Can I have the first slide, please? So thank you very much for still being here. I'm guessing the energy is pretty low, so I hope we can entertain you. I am the co-founder of Kpernik. We're an Indonesian organization that has been mainly known for technology distribution and as an R&D lab for finding solutions to social and environmental issues. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We have also, as a result of our technology distribution work, we've also been involved in responding to a number of disasters across Indonesia. Unfortunately, Indonesia is a country that's very familiar with natural disasters, and because many of the technologies that we distribute are very useful, as a result, we began to also respond to these emergencies. And when I talk about technologies, I'm not talking about the kinds of technologies that the previous panel was talking about. They're really simple things like water filters and solar lights and face masks. So we've responded to the Merapi volcano, a number of volcano eruptions, the forest fires in Kalimantan and Sumatra, the Lombok earthquake, and the Central Sulawesi earthquake, liquefaction, and tsunami disaster. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So as our technology distribution began with like these simple, the clicker doesn't work. As our technology distribution began with really simple technologies, because we can see that more sophisticated technologies sometimes have issues, we started to move into being more responsive to actual community needs. Being a really small organization, we've only got 70 people across Indonesia, but really great networks and connections across the country, which means that we can be very agile and very responsive. Next slide, please. So from water filters to masks, next slide, We then also started providing reconstruction kits and education kits and hygiene education. Next slide, please. We provided, there was even a situation in Bali when we were responding to the Mount Agung volcano response where, as we know, cattle are one of people's biggest assets. So we started providing, feeding programs and protection for cattle. So it was a very responsive program to the local needs, and we were able to do that because we were based there with that community. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of the kinds of responses that we have provided. Next slide. And one big factor that's enabled us to be very responsive is the wide range of partnerships that we have with governments, with companies, with musicians, with startups, a whole range of different partners that provide funding and other types of support. And we also rely quite heavily on crowdfunding, and we've had more than 10,000 people donate to our various disaster responses, which has again enabled us to move very quickly. Next slide. So one thing that connects the disaster response to our other type of work is that we're also innovating for future emergencies. Next slide, please. One big issue in Indonesia and globally is, of course, the issue of air quality. Next slide. So we are we've been working for the last few years on the development of a DIY air purifier that's made from locally available materials that can be made locally by families. Next slide. This is what it looks like. Next slide. And also providing safe haze schools with, again, locally available materials that can be put together quite easily. Next slide. Another issue that we keep coming up against is when an emergency hits, we always have a shortage of N95 masks, whether it is the supplying country or whether it's importing them. So we are in pretty advanced stages of producing them locally. So this provides employment for communities, but also obviously addresses a massive issue that we face time and time again. We're just getting the certification right now. Next slide. And this came out of one of our other innovation projects where we're producing washable menstrual pads that are produced all over Indonesia, creating economic opportunities. But then we also kind of hacked it a little bit and produced an emergency menstrual hygiene kit. We know that this is not perfect, and now working on the development of menstrual underwear, which would be more appropriate for emergency situations. So there's a lot of other innovations that we're working on, but I'll stop there because my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. Just want to quickly summarize perhaps a couple of things that Eva didn't have the time to mention. And it's probably easier to remember that they are one of those organizations who are working with the last mile delivery, working with the communities who are disadvantaged or not necessarily being covered by the local authorities or other organizations. And for that, I think we need more of those organizations in the field, specifically those who are have courage enough to experiment, fail, try again, make it better, and move on. It does cost funds, and they are also they are getting the funds from the number of organizations, including philanthropy. But like with anything to do with the experiment and innovative technologies, no matter how simple they do cost a lot of money. With that on mind, I will turn now to Jeremy, and Jeremy can take the floor now.
Thank you, Drasko, and good afternoon to all. And thank you to the organisers for having us here on this panel today. It's a very interesting and relevant topic. I work for ICFA as the regional representative for Asia and Pacific. And ICFA is a global network working to strengthen principled and effective humanitarian action by NGOs and their partners. Our membership is made up of local, national, regional and international NGOs and NGO networks. And we work mainly in the humanitarian area, so I'll be speaking a lot from humanitarian perspective today as part of the broader disaster management framework. And we're largely working to help NGOs also understand and to navigate a changing environment. So many issues related to localization and partnerships really are at the heart of our work. In the ASEAN region, we provide support to the ADMIA Partnership Group, which is an NGO engagement mechanism that's been in place for over 10 years in the region. And the APG supports NGO engagement in policy development related to ADMIA and the DMHA in operational preparedness and response with the AHA Centre, and includes engaging NGOs in the ERAT program and in programs such as the ASEAN Safe Schools Initiative. And I'm sure all of you know what those acronyms mean. I won't elaborate on them. I'm mainly presenting today a set of recommendations, but first wanted to make a few points on localization and why this topic is so important to humanitarian actors and in disaster management more broadly. And localization, we see it as a process through which many stakeholders are trying to make a system that is very internationally driven, more locally led, locally delivered, and locally accountable. And through this process, the aim is that humanitarian action will become more effective and efficient and even more locally relevant. And localization is also driven by wider change that's going on, which we see in the type of organizations that are leading or delivering humanitarian assistance, the ways they're working, and the context in which this work is taking place. And we see many different stakeholders working to enable localization, and they have different perspectives on what this actually means. But what is really interesting to see is that universally now across the humanitarian sector and in its associated areas, we see really a great interest in this topic and an understanding that there is a need for this process to go ahead, but we don't necessarily see agreement on how to do that. So discussions like today are actually really quite important. So with this in mind, I'll move to my recommendations on the points for the discussion today, how ASEAN and its member states can contribute to advancing the localization agenda, supporting meaningful capacity strengthening, and improving accountability to local communities. First of all, we recommend that ASEAN and its member states can support NGO coordination to ensure local, national, and international NGOs are really engaged as partners in disaster management from the community level all the way up to national planning. In most ASEAN countries, NGOs have established their own coordination mechanisms. These can be very diverse. We see layers of networks in the Philippines. We see networks of faith-based organizations here in Indonesia. We see subnational networks forming in Myanmar and other types of coalitions. In some countries, these are already part of the disaster management framework. In others, they're not embedded yet. And we believe that it's truly important that these mechanisms are supported in all ASEAN countries and that they're given space to operate and to convene NGO voices and bring together actors on a wide range of issues. We also see that NGO networks play a real role in capacity building. They help to uphold principles, codes of conduct, and they promote quality and standards to their members. And this leads to stronger NGOs and civil society overall. And we see clear examples from around the region and globally of how stronger networks don't only strengthen capacity, but also let NGOs share their capacity, which is really, we think, quite important. Second recommendation is to ensure that national and regional policies actually create space for the principled, independent, neutral, impartial humanitarian action by NGOs when it's needed. Much of the NGOs work in ASEAN region is focused on disaster management more broadly, including disaster risk reduction and preparedness. But we also need to remember that there is the humanitarian response component. And many NGOs need to be able to shift their modality between disaster management, disaster preparedness, and also a humanitarian response approach. And NGOs need the space to be able to do this. And I wanted to highlight for today one particular point, which is how government policies, both local and national, really can enable or restrict this space. And this is central to localization and for NGOs and civil society. Because NGOs are voluntary organizations, they have to negotiate their space. They don't have this space provided. So we can see that government regulations can control or limit access, but also enable access. And they can support the coordination of NGOs. They can support NGOs to be able to participate in activities. But when these mechanisms are not in place in policy and when they happen in ad hoc ways, this can be very difficult for civil society and NGOs to navigate. So we encourage increased dialogue between NGOs, governments and partners at local and national levels within the ASEAN region to improve the humanitarian access and effectiveness. We also need to reinforce the role civil society plays as a foundation of a people-centered approach in the region. And to do this, we need to ensure the space for civil society action is preserved. I think ASEAN's way of working broadly, the One ASEAN, One Response approach, lends itself to being based in complementarity, considering which organization is best placed to act where and when, and to act in a principled and effective manner. And this is based on considering the different advantages organizations have in different settings. And strong local and national NGOs need also strong partners outside the region to enable them to engage in their action effectively. And the strong ASEAN NGOs are not important only at home, they're also important globally. We see now more and more organizations from this region acting internationally, and actually ICFA's newest member is an NGO called Human Initiative from right here in Indonesia. So it's really exciting to see NGOs from this region are actually now working globally and are carrying ASEAN values out into other contexts as well. We also think that it's important to enable the work that NGOs do in terms of their accountability to people affected by crisis, and this was mentioned in the previous panel. Along with localization, this is one of the key undertakings of the humanitarian system now, is to be more accountable. And improving disaster management can't just be about improving capacity of organizations. We have to focus on how these organizations become more accountable to local people and local communities. And we need to also ask ourselves, who decides who is local? Is it a question for governments? Is it a question for civil society? Is it a question for communities themselves? It may seem easy to answer, but once we start talking about situations of displacement, these questions actually can become very difficult. And NGOs can be one of the stakeholders in helping to navigate that space and to helping to work with other partners. And we encourage disaster management stakeholders in ASEAN to prioritize working with NGOs and civil society organizations that include diverse and representative groups, particularly women-focused and women-led organizations, organizations focused on disability inclusion, organizations working on aging and youth, and on the inclusion of minority and underserved groups. This is the way that we truly leave no one behind. And my last recommendation is that stakeholders here should support multi-stakeholder processes to develop a shared understanding of what localization means and how progress will be measured. There are many different perspectives, as I mentioned at the start, but some great work has been done in the Asia-Pacific region to look at what localization actually means and how we can track its progress at local and national levels. A lot of this work has been led actually by the Australian government and some research teams working in the Pacific. And they've got some excellent research and an evidence base now that we think would be very applicable in the ASEAN region, and we would encourage that this work be carried out in partnership also with NGOs in this region. We need to build on actual research and turn this practical experience into an evidence base so we can demonstrate that the need for change to other stakeholders as well. And my final comment is also that ICFA is very much a believer that we need to strengthen NGO influence in policy and advocacy. And we want very much to raise the voice of national and local NGO actors, particularly at the national and at the regional levels. So in this regard, ICFA and the APG are now working to engage in the policy development process related to the new ADMIR work program, We're undertaking a consultation at the moment with NGOs and networks in the region. We're really looking forward to presenting the perspectives of those actors to the ASEAN Secretariat and to other stakeholders so that these can inform the development of the new work program, but also that they can be taken on board by governments in the ASEAN member states so they can really consider the NGO perspective in their planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. I wanted to give you 2 minutes more so you can finish with all the recommendations without repeating them all. It's obviously very pointy and thoughtful consideration towards the recommendations that Jeremy, on behalf of Regional ICFA Office, was putting to the symposium here. I would like then to move now to another multilateral partner, UNESCO, and invite Tiziana to present.
Thank you, Drasko, and very good afternoon to everyone. And at the outset, I would like to express a special thanks to the ASEAN Secretariat and CSIS for having invited ESCAP to be here. And I also express appreciation to the government of China for the funding support. Now, in my brief presentation, I would like to address the enabling policy environment, and I'd also like to say something about partnerships, and I have 3 main messages. But before I get to the main messages, I would like to just present a very few facts and figures. Next. Sorry, this has gone off. Okay, so this is the slide that our moderator in the previous session kindly presented on the riskscape for Southeast Asia. It shows the dominance of agriculture. It's based on a probabilistic model, and it's based on an assumption of business as usual. Next. When we look at fatalities from natural disasters, the good news, they're on the decline, but storms and earthquakes in Southeast Asia still account for the brunt of the fatalities that are experienced. So besides economic losses, we need to keep in mind the implications for human lives. And next. And then we're using a CGE model, a general equilibrium model. We modeled the impact of unmitigated disaster risk on poverty eradication rates. And the blue circle shows what could be achieved if there were no disasters. The red circle shows poverty reduction under an assumption of unmitigated disaster risk. And in all cases, you see how poverty reduction will be slowed down by disasters. So my first message is that there is a need to scale up action at whole of economy national level and at ASEAN-wide level to support disaster resilience of poorest communities. So the fantastic work that NGOs are doing, the last mile NGOs, this is all key, it's important, but the policy environment is a key enabler. And there was some discussion this morning about investments in various sectors, and using the same model, our projection is that investments in social protection has the highest poverty reduction impact. If under an assumption of no investments, an estimated 120 million people will continue to be living in extreme poverty in 2030. And then investments in infrastructure, education, health, they all have poverty reducing impacts, but the one with the biggest impact is social protection. And that once again underlines the importance of investing in policies that will benefit communities and will protect the livelihoods of the poor during disasters. And then disasters no borders, so ASEAN-wide action also needs to be upscaled. And here I think the main point I'd like to make is the need to take the discussion out from the technical level, because the more we talk to each other, the more we preach to the converted, but really take the discussion to the high political level, to those that make key decisions like budgetary outlays. And I think the professor from ADBI mentioned a similar message on the importance of presenting the economics and making the business case for investing in disaster risk reduction. And so ESCAP and ASEAN are working closely in partnership on this, and we're working under the chairmanship of the Philippines, the ACDM on a drought declaration, and we hope to bring this drought declaration to the attention of the leaders at the summit. And then another region-wide upscaling, given the high death toll as a result of tsunamis, is on augmenting tsunami monitoring systems. Time and again, we see that existing systems, while they have made tremendous progress since that terrible event in 2005, still systems have their gaps. And so here I'd like to just highlight the potential role of the private sector. And from our experience of working with them, they have proven to be willing and enthusiastic partners of peoples and communities. Sometimes it's a matter of how do we make it work, given that they speak one language, and at least international organizations, and I think governments as well, speak somehow another language. Next, please. Sorry, I've been forgetting to get the slides going. Next. Okay, and so there are three innovative initiatives, and one is a partnership between ITU, WMO, and the IOC on smart cables. And the idea here is to equip smart cables with environmental sensors that can monitor oceans, that can generate data on the environmental state of oceans, and can generate information on seismicity and displacements in sea level rise. And Indonesia, through the BMKG, has expressed interest in being a pilot country for this. And there are already 3 demonstration projects that have been funded. The latest is a smart cable from New Caledonia to Vanuatu. Another one in the Mediterranean, and then another one in Portugal. And then the shipping industry has also indicated clear interest in helping to augment data sources. And then companies that operate fixed platforms like oil rigs have also offered their infrastructure to augment data sources. So I think this is really all quite exciting, and it needs to be given a push. And if that slide was a little wordy, but the intention was really just to give additional information for those who are interested. And then my final slide, next please, is that money matters. And funding for DRR still remains a small percentage of overall funding for emergency response. And the last slide, next please. ESCAP has a multi-donor trust fund on tsunami early warning, which was set up in 2005. The fund is now basically depleted, and while we have some interest that is being shown by donor partners, I would still make the plea that our best intentions also need money. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiziana. Just to recap quickly on three messages that I also was hearing, that investment in social protection is the biggest impact on the extreme poverty, that private sector organizations are willing partner to national authorities, and the last one, that money does matter, but funding in DRR is overall a very small percentage of the overall funding for the emergency response. I would like to move now to our academia colleagues and to learn also from their research and what potentially might be used by the ASEAN partners as much as the rest of the world. Dr. Eiko, apologies.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure and very privilege to be here at the ASEAN High Level Committee. I would like to start my slide, page 3, to shorten my presentation time. Can you go to the page 3, please? I'm trying to answer the given question, number 1 and number 3. The first one is page 3, the creating enabling environment for advancing localization of disaster management. I am an expert in the education sector, but when we talk about localization of disaster management, I think it will be good opportunity for me to share my experiences in Japan after the 2011 Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. Because in Japan, as we have been discussing all the day today, we have an early warning system. We have hazard map at almost all the municipalities in different types of natural hazards. However, we couldn't stop losing, our lives, especially at the school. The 2011 tsunami occurred at the school hours at 2:46 of a Friday afternoon on March 11. We have lost many children, but one of the most tragic events is the Okawa Elementary School accident. In the page 4, please, we have 74 out of 108 students killed by the tsunami. And then also we lost 175 community residents out of 209 members. So this actually happened in Japan. So back to the slide 3, please. So then the question is, how can we localize disaster information? Because, in terms of disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, risk assessment and risk communication are the basics for the disaster management. So then, how to localize risk, how to assess local disaster risk, and then how to communicate identified local disaster risk to the people or the children. This is a quite important topic to be discussed. So then, at the Okawa Elementary School, when the 74 children were lost, victims of family sued prefecture and city governments to try to get the answer why they needed to die under school supervision. So when we talk about the early warning system and disaster response, but once the precious lives were lost, we've been discussing whose failure, who's negligent, why this happened. So then communities or the municipal governments are primarily responsible for saving the lives of the people. And then if the disaster happened under the school supervision, this is school responsibility. So then we had a high court decision confirmed last year, October, and then now all the schools are responsible for preparing for practical and effective school disaster contingency plan. This is what we are requested throughout the Japanese schools. So then the question is, we need to strengthen capacity of the school teachers, school management, and then also we really need to strengthen the collaborative relationship among school, municipal governments, community, and then prefectural government, and then also the national government. So then, what kind of capacity should be developed for reducing loss of lives. So then I would like to focus on how to identify local disaster risk at the school level, because we have a lot of information on disaster. And then if we focus on the one school district to identify local disaster risk there, how to integrate scattered information into a school district. So, so far, until this High Court decision is confirmed, no one cares about that kind of management at all. All the schools, more than 98% of the schools, already have school contingency plan. However, once a disaster happened, it should be effective, practical, not to cut and copy paste of the things, So then this is very important thing. So this is one of the solutions. A map is a kind of tools for identifying local disaster risk. Oh, please, page 6, please. Yes. This is this side, the right side is a hazard map, tsunami inundation map prepared by prefectural government before the 2011 tsunami. The red circle here is where the school located. It's 10 kilometers away from the river mouth. And then this is one of the geomorphological map prepared by the National Geographical Survey Institute on the left. So the area where the school is located is also circled in red. So this deep green is backmarsh. So then the area, school is located just next to the river, and then it's very lowland, and then very watery, muddy place. So then even though we didn't see that the area is outside of the estimated inundation map, however, the school is already located at the very low and nearby the river. But since we had dikes surrounded alongside the river, we couldn't notice, many couldn't notice that we are quite close to the river. So next slide, please. This is actual inundation by the 2011 tsunami. So green circled is where the school is located, and then purple is heavily damaged houses located. So then schools were damaged totally, and then all the houses were washed away. That's why not only the school children, local residents were many killed there. So then in Japan, we believed hazard map is a safe map. If we are not in an inundated area, danger area, we are safe. This kind of, misunderstanding we have. However, the 2011 tsunami showed us that the hazard map is only a basis of the assumption. So this doesn't say anything, it is safe. So then this is what we have to do is we need to think beyond a hazard map. This is only a reference. So then all the school children, community people, and then school management, we all need to understand the limitation of a hazard map. That's what we learned from the 2011 tsunami. Next slide, please. So then possible ways for advancing localization is that we really need to strengthen map reading skills of teachers, and I understand that the hazard map is a limitation, and then we really need to understand local disaster risk by reading local contour map or geomorphological maps. So these maps are all available in Japan. However, we have been focusing on the hazard map. So this is one of the solutions which I have been working in the same city, the schools in the same city where the local elementary school is located. Because this is how we try not to repeat the same disaster or tragic event in the school. So we have developed a teacher training course using these maps, and then these maps are utilized at the school education by the children. So this is one of the possible solutions for seriously considering how to identify local disaster risk in the community level. So then second point is the question number 3. Can I? Okay. Positioning local wisdom and traditional knowledge. We have an expert from Indonesia, but I also conducted survey in Banda Aceh since 2014 to compare the tsunami disaster recovery between Japan and Aceh. And then one of the very famous local wisdom in Aceh is smog. Smog is received the UN Sasakawa Award, and then it tells that smog is tsunami, and then how to evacuate from the tsunami. So this is an old saying. However, when we conducted the survey in 2015, students in Simil Island, where smog exists, did not know much about smog, even though they understand the word smog, but they didn't understand what to do when they, listen to smog word. So then what we have to consider is how to update local wisdom based on the latest disaster experience, and then to transmit that to the next generation. So local wisdom could not be surviving forever. So this is another challenge we have to. And then also from the international cooperation perspective, in Banda Aceh, Japan funded many tsunami poles to show the height of the 2004 tsunami. However, after certain years, these tsunami poles were forgotten and abandoned. So I tried to revitalize this tsunami pole at one of junior high school 2 weeks ago with my student from my university, try to repaint and to understand the meaning of the tsunami pole again. But if these things are brought by international donor and then it's not fit to the culture there, local culture, it will be easily forgotten. So how to revitalize this and how to root it into the local community culture. This is one of the challenge. So far, this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eiko. Very interesting, and of course we were discussing that before. It's all good to put the things in education, but there has to be a further connection between the schools and the local communities, because we are also thinking 1 generation from now, everybody should be educated in disaster, hazard map reading, but it takes time, and it doesn't work just if it's being done by the schools in sort of isolation from the communities or the local or national authorities. Thanks again for that. And I want to move to our last presenter. I do apologize for taking a bit more time, but I think these discussions are very important. And I know specifically how scientists and NGO and UN and everybody wants to have another word. And because I'm also Croatian as much as I'm Australian, we don't really follow the authority on the times. But it is my pleasure to present to you the last presenter, Rahmawati Hussein Ibuama, and which I think it's known to most of you. But I will just give a quick introduction, as I mentioned before she presents her presentation. She is on the advisory board member. She's the advisory board member of the Indonesian National Disaster Management Agency, as well as the vice chair of Muhammadiyah Disaster Management Center, a unit of Muhammadiyah organization, one of the largest faith-based organizations, community-based organization, NGOs, all in one in a sense, and then probably much more. With approximately 35 million members, as Ibuama says, the number is not known. It might go up or down by a couple of million. The Muhammadiyah also responds to about 50 to 75 emergencies throughout the year or annually. And also currently, Ibuama is serving as the committee member of Indonesian Humanitarian Alliance for Rohingya refugees, both in Myanmar and Bangladesh, as well as an executive board of Humanitarian Forum of Indonesia, an interfaith-based organization forum, and a member of Humanitarian Country Team, ACT. She's also an assistant professor of the Yusuf Kala School of Government, Universitas Muhammadiyah, Jakarta, where she teaches urban and development planning, disaster management, and research methods. She has been working in disaster humanitarian related works for more than 15 years And since 2018, she was selected as an advisory group of United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund. With that, Ibu Ama, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Drasko, for the overwhelming and generous introduction. And thank you as well for ASEAN and CSIS for the invitation. And forgive me if I sneezing in the middle of the presentation. I tried to connect all the previous panelists since I'm wearing many hats. So I'll try to see from the perspective of the government and also the national NGOs. I would like to address the first question on creating enabling environment for advancing localization, NDM, and disaster management. As previously mentioned, regulation is important. Next. Starting in 2007, as you may know, that's the beginning of the BNPB was founded. It's based on the law on number 24 in 2007. There has been focus on how the disaster management in Indonesia been decentralized. So how the approach from reactive to become more preventive, and then from centralized to decentralized, and it has been set up the local disaster management agency in 34 provinces in almost 514 districts and municipalities. So that's the way the law tried to establish or guide the rule for the decentralized disaster management and the inclusiveness. In a way, in the law, it's also mentioned the involvement of the private sector and also the NGO or community in general. So this law been opening or also enforcing all the various stakeholders to involve in disaster management in Indonesia. Just next slide, I just draw how the disaster management organization system in Indonesia, as you may aware, as we are having 17,000 islands, so the structure been pretty level, so it's from the national to the community level. It structured into 6 different levels, and it's not easy to organize or to do the coordination, as BNPB or the National Disaster Management Agency is not a line ministry, so there is no direct control. So that's why it's very important the role of the local government, in this case the provincial government and the district and municipality government, to also have the awareness. That's why since last year, actually, the new or the current head of the BNPB, the General Doni Monardo, introducing the pentahelix strategy. Next. The pentahelix strategy is the framework to optimize the result of activities or work through the multi-stakeholder engagement, a new doctrine for synergy in disaster management that consists of government, academia, business, the community, and also the media. So this very important to build the strategy where the elements introduced are the spirit of mutual cooperation, the spirit of doing good deeds, and the synergy among 5 different elements. And to address that, how actually to create the enabling environment for localization agenda. Next slide. I want to focus on first, based on the experience working in disaster management, understanding national and subnational or local actor in disaster management and its complementarity is very important. Without understanding that, it's difficult to share the role and responsibilities, and also to really put the localization in agenda, because you do not know who's doing what and how the capacity of each level. Next. And I will give the example of what we've been doing and also addressing what would question why Australian help like Muhammadiyah. Because geographically, Indonesia is a huge country, so it's not easy to address or to consolidate or to prepare the capacity at the local level. So what we do is try to develop the various structure. First, providing the National Advisory Board with technical board, and then at the local level, we have the Local Advisory Board, which representing various actors who play in disaster management. If we want to improve the capacity without involving them in the process, it's not easy. And there is no connection if we don't work at the various levels. So what we did, we are setting up. So we work with the Ministry of Health, with the BNPB, and then with the hospital accreditation. At that time, we work on the hospital preparedness and community readiness. So the setting up of the structure, this will help to advocate the policy, and then to address the issues on the system through the technical board, and then implementing through the support of the local government. The local area and the community also involved in the process. So the community is not only an object, but is also the subject of the change and subject for the understanding. Next, I will draw the various challenges. There are several challenges that we found that could be used as a lesson learned. First, the institutional. Many local government in Indonesia, and also what we've been working throughout the country, is there is still not having a clear structure, role, and responsibility between all level government. The SOP, the mechanism is not there yet. On the more practical basis, not the regulation in general. And then the second is human resources, not having sufficient personnel and proper tasks of delegation. That's everywhere. And then the policy of effective implementation. There is no lack of appropriate policies, rule and regulation for making decision. So not only having regulation, but making decision, mobilizing resources, and engaging with the relevant public, private, NGO, and academia. So there is an issue of the local government of that, and also financial that's been mentioned before. The technical is also not sufficient, and I would to highlight the leadership is not there. So what I could recommend in ASEAN is having on the local government to local government engagement. So sharing on and having best practices would be very good for all the engagement in the future. And then the second, not only between local and local government within Asian country, but it's also the knowledge management. It's been talked a lot in many various occasions, but the knowledge management in Asia is not been formulated, so we cannot really use as a base for working or improving the effective disaster management. We have the modalities. Next. The modalities share similar culture and hazard risks almost are, and then increasing capacity, the non-state actor like mentioned by Jeremy, the involvement of the various NGO and FBO, the existing collaboration is already there and we could improve. And then the last slide, I would like to also offer the adaptive management and flexibility in funding mechanism through various way, through G2G, G2P, private to people, and then private to government. So the flexibility in funding mechanism would allow the increasing capacity at the regional level. And then local leadership and ownership of the program and mechanism. If you want to really address the local agenda, then give the leadership at the local level. If they don't have the ownership of and also the strong leader, and then it's all go back to the national or the regional level. So it's very important to address that. And then the integrating local knowledge and wisdom in disaster management, engaging the traditional and also the next slide, the last slide. The engaging traditional leader throughout the process is very important because the player is not only government, as I mentioned. So that's very important, engaging both traditional actor in disaster management and non-traditional actor in disaster management. Then I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Ama. Quite a lot from Ibu Ama on the last presentation. I think quite a lot for the ASEAN Secretariat as much as our Center, who are the partners of the national organizations here, but as much as in the region, to take into consideration. With that in mind, we just hit of 5 o'clock, so I need to see with the organizers how many more minutes we can have for the questions. If we can have 15 minutes, I think that would be very useful, but I need the guidance from the organizer. In the meantime, please, I'll take 3 to 5 quick questions and we will try to address them. Yes, go ahead.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Hi. I'm Maria Holtzberg from UN Women Regional Office in Bangkok. Thank you so much for excellent presentation. And this actually ties into the previous sessions where it was mentioned a bit about like the equality of disaster impact. And we at UN Women know that the impacts affect people differently, especially women or persons living with disability, for instance. So you will be very surprised to hear my question now. We know women-focused organizations and networks are essential components of building resilience in a community, and we also know that they're first responders in many cases. But we also see that they're often overlooked in disaster management. So my question to this panel is, why do you think that is the case, or do you think that is the case? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sorry to interrupt. The Secretariat would like to inform that there will be 10 minutes for question and answer for this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, maybe then we can take this one. It's obviously addressed to the panel, and maybe I can start with one.
Good. Thank you for a good question. Yeah, it's not an easy question, but based on what we've been discussing, because Muhammadiyah is also have the women wing organization, and also we've been working with the women. Why women not involved and mostly not be part of the decision making process? The problem many times disaster scenes as a male word, because still the perception on disaster management is response, not risk reduction. So that's why changing disaster and not respond and risk, it will allow the involvement more women. Even the second one, there has been a change as well. The women involvement in the community resilience. One of the program, the new program that launched by the National Disaster Management Agency in Indonesia is household community resilience. So in this household community resilience, women become the subject of change in risk reduction, and it's been launched since then. And the government work with the women organization, and then also working with many different agency within the government to also enforce to launch the program down to the village level, because we do also have the group structure in Indonesia. There are women group in many different in every villages. So we will use that the women group to do the household resilience through the community. So we will, they are having some engagement between the household and community resilience through the women and also the community group.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Just to add to that, which is I think is a very, very comprehensive answer, but I also think there's a structural element to this from those actors outside the local system, the international sector itself. We want one network to give us all the answers for the NGO community. We want one focal point for that network. We want civil society to structure itself the way UN agencies and others are structured, with very simple, very clear mandates and lines of accountability. And that's not how civil society works. And I think the localized humanitarian system and disaster management system has to recognize that we're going to have a very diverse range of different networks that need to be listened to in different ways. And I just don't think that the system is set up to do it at the moment. It's a lot of what we're trying to do is to figure out how to get better at listening to diverse voices. And I think the women's focused networks, women-led organizations and networks of such should be one of the first groups that we're approaching to be engaged more inclusively. It would be great to see this work being led in countries in this region and then taken out to the world.
Any other question? We can probably take one more. Gentleman on the right.
Thank you very much. I would like to raise one point. It is not a question, but it is a proposal for all of us. I'm working for the Southeast Asia Minister of Education Organization, Open and Distant Learning Center, which was founded in 1997 by our Minister Wardiman at that time. Tomorrow we will have our anniversary, 23rd anniversary. Yes, I think the disaster awareness has to be distributed, has to be disseminated, has to be distributed to all levels. And we have our network with universities, with secondary schools, technical vocational schools, and up to the teachers of primary schools. We are cooperating, for instance, with our Ikatan Guru Indonesia, the Indonesian Association of Teachers, and we are doing online training, for instance. And through this channel, I would say that if you have any stuff, you have any content to be disseminated, we would be very pleased to do so together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that comment. If no other questions, I'll wrap up the session so that we finish on time as per organizers' advice. So what we heard today is, in a way, we hope that this panel managed to show going from local with organization which is very much in the innovative space like Kpernik, moving on to an NGO fora represented by Eiko in the region, multilateral organizations like the UN and inter-regional organizations, all the way to the research being done by the science advising us how we should be approaching disaster risk management, and finally finishing again back to the national, local, and regional level, learning potentially what could be the advice for the policies of the ASEAN in the future. Without necessarily going through all of that, I think that the participants were putting quite a lot of pointy recommendations which are going to find their ways into the presentations and of course the material that is going to be distributed to all of you before the end of tomorrow, and we will summarize it, and I will also summarize it more here and present it in a better format at the end of tomorrow. With that, I want to thank all the colleagues on the panel, starting from Ilwama, from Dr. Eiko, from Eva, Jeremy, and Tiziana, and thank you all very much for your attention.
Please give a big round of applause once again for the moderators and the panelists of our last session today. Thank you, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and ladies and gentlemen for your active participation. Before we close the day, I have several announcements. For all speakers and moderators, please come down to the lobby to receive the token of appreciation from the Secretariat for your contribution today in all the great thematic sessions. Second, for guests staying at the Sheraton Hotel, the bus is ready in front of the ASEAN lobby. Also, tomorrow we will start again at 9 a.m., but we kindly request you to come early for registration. Our venue will change to ASEAN Hall. So we are not coming back for this room. We will be in the next building, which is the Heritage Building. And from there, you can ask directions to the ASEAN Hall. And lastly, for sponsor participants, please submit your boarding pass and other necessary travel documents at the registration desk. With that being said, have a good rest, and I see you all tomorrow. Thank you.